Hello and welcome to this HSI Donesafe webinar, Are You Measuring What Matters Most? A critical discussion on common safety metrics. I'd like to welcome to the webinar Georgina Poole. Georgina is a respected health and safety leader, keynote speaker and advocate for HOP with over 17 years of experience helping organizations improve safety culture and outcomes. A doctoral researcher in safety science and host of the Leading Safely podcast, which is streamed in over 100 countries. Georgina is known for her practical insights on building learning organizations and creating systems that support people to fail safely. She's also the co-founder of Event Learning Australia and recently co-authored her first book with Professor Sydney Decker, Random Noise, Measuring Your Company's Safety Performance, which we'll be talking a bit about today as well. So welcome, Georgina.
Thanks, Ben.
So I guess to set the scene, for decades, organizations have anchored a lot of their understanding of safety performance in traditional metrics, such as lost time injury frequency rate, total recordable injury frequency rate. And whilst at some point these would have felt like clear and objective indicators of progress, now increasingly they might be challenged for what they are, and maybe more importantly, what they're not. So do you want to set the scene a little bit around how these sorts of sacred cow type metrics have come to play a role in organizations looking at how they navigate risk and how safe their work environment actually is?
Yeah, so I think to start off with, those two specific metrics and total recordable incident rates as well, so your TRIR as well, have been around for decades and decades and used by many industries to determine whether or not an organization is safe. Or not. And perhaps some of our watchers, listeners, tuners in today are working for an organisation that when it comes to tendering for a job or putting in for work elsewhere or a project, they have to provide those numbers to whoever they're tendering to. Because of the amount of time they have been around for, there has been a lot of research, and that's what kind of went into the book as well around what these numbers actually mean. I myself, being embedded in a number of organizations that did use them as indicators, kind of saw a disjointedness between what the number actually said on the bit of paper, but the practices, the learning, the actual incident rates on the ground. So even from a workers intended versus workers done approach to those incident rates, there was definitely, in my personal and professional opinion, a lot of massaging and a lot of things that were going on, which showed to me as a professional that it wasn't exactly an indicator. It wasn't exactly accurate in that space. The numbers themselves, whether they're high or low, do not give insight into those things like your practices, the risks that your workers are actually facing, etc. But yet there are multiple large organizations and smaller ones. And again, even those from our people that are watching right now who will still judge and make those business decisions on those numbers. And that's where we need to challenge the thinking.
So I'm curious then, how do metrics like that become part of the primary ways in which we measure what's going on?
So we look for an easy number. We look for something that is measurable and achievable and on the surface looks like it's telling you something that you need it to. And I mean, it's not just TRIFR and LTIFR. If you go to your organization and, I can tell you that 99% of organizations I've worked for counted hazard reports that were coming in. We also counted take fives. That one, for no apparent reason whatsoever, hazards as if we identified a certain amount of hazards, then that told us that we must be getting safer because there's no risks left out in the workplace, right? So these numbers kind of give the impression to senior leaders and senior executives and board members that, hey, we have a hold on or a grip on what's happening in our workplace. But over time, and the research that's out there, you know, from the Construction Safety Research Alliance in the States to very different ones across the world, and to write the book, we looked at over 40 different research studies. It all points to, and whether it proves or disproves, there are a number of people that will controversially say it doesn't prove, but it points to the fact that just because you have a high injury frequency rate doesn't mean you're going to kill someone, and just because you have a low one doesn't mean you're safe either, vice versa. So I think that we stuck onto these numbers thinking that, you know, they were easy to grab, they were easy to grasp. Our board members liked them because it made them feel like they were in control, and it still does today. That I think that's one of the challenges why people won't necessarily let go of these, because we've done it for one way for a period of time, but also it gives me the illusion like I have a handle on the risks within my organization. And if you don't, that's a really uncomfortable feeling. So I'd rather stick with an old metric that has been perhaps debunked or disproven than throw that away and find something a bit more newer and more challenging.
Numbers can be very seductive, particularly when they're comfortable. And if everyone's using a certain number and it's benchmarkable, it's familiar, it can be jarring to entertain that maybe they're not the right ones, because I guess also then you have to look retrospectively and think, well, something that was an area of strength for us and gave us a sense of how we're going to navigate things maybe wasn't serving the purpose.
Correct. Yeah. And that's hard to deal with, right? Like we're definitely, I have not seen anyone go, we're throwing it out and putting something completely new in place, as in a whole replacement. But definitely I've worked with organizations now that are shifting the narrative, making a small change, talking about stories instead of, or unmitigated risk instead of just focusing on the numbers. So there's definitely organizations that are moving in the right direction, but they definitely didn't go, oh, yep, LTIFR is rubbish, let's throw it out and let's put something in and then go with a whole change. It was an incremental process to get to where they are.
So I suppose as well, you have the value of the metric itself, but also in your experience, have you also seen then the accuracy in terms of gathering the information, and particularly if incentives are involved or tied to that number, where you may not actually be getting a clear picture even just of what that is?
Yeah. And some of you that have, you know, perhaps listened to the podcast or know me personally will know that I worked in a number of organizations, mainly mining, oil and gas and construction, where those numbers were tied to incentives. Incentives like, for example, an underground mine that I worked for, our shift supervisors received $2,000 clear in their net pay every month if we hit our hazard reporting numbers and our injury frequency rates. Because of that, I became one of the team members that were the most hated on site. And then if we hit those targets, I became the most loved. So it changed. But also because of that, you can imagine what used to happen to ensure that we hit those numbers and what that behavior drove. So things like I didn't pass injuries up the line because nobody wanted to be that person that, you know, affected that $2,000. I super glued injuries together. So I would have workers come to me with proper injuries that required doctor's treatment, but those workers were adamant, and I'm talking quite stressed, quite, you know, like on the edge around not wanting to go to the doctor because they feared what those repercussions would be. And so we would actually do our own home job of first aid to allow them not to go to the doctor and kind of keep that injury under the radar. Some of the other things that were happening, I worked for a trucking organisation that would have our truck drivers that were injured colouring in maps of Australia so that they weren't classed as an injury and they were, you know, doing suitable duties, go figure. Then there was also a number of organisations, and one in particular, again, a mining one, where if you didn't hit your hazard or your take 5 number, so we had every shift person on shift would be displayed on a TV at the beginning of pre-shift meetings in the morning before the guys would go out to do their daily tasks. Every single person's name was coloured either red or green based on whether or not you did a hazard report or a take 5. And if you were marked as red, obviously you were the person that didn't do it. And you could see the whole entire crew kind of almost I want to use the word bully, like almost bully you and peer pressure you into how come you're the person that's going to impact, the shift boss being cranky today because he's not going to get his $2,000 allowance, for that month. So those kinds of things also meant, as a safety person, counting those for the sake of counting, I would get love letters from the guys on my hazard report. So nothing about a hazard whatsoever, but hey, Georgina, you're looking really good today. And I would tick the box next to that person's name so that they wouldn't get embarrassed and not be shown as not having done their hazard reports. Life-size spiders, pictures of like unsafe situations where the guys would draw like stick figures on cranes and they're like falling off a crane, and they would write like, is this safe? And then you'd have to write a response back to them. So you'd have that kind of behavior happening because they did not want to be the person that changed that. So when you have a number and you drive a number with an incentive and you put that focus out there, you put a billboard out there, you put a embroidery on a shirt, whatever you're doing to celebrate that success, that places undue pressure on your workforce to ensure at every cost that that number stays the same, does not change. And that's a really uncomfortable feeling for someone to have to deal with, because we believe even if we have a target, that's not the pressure that we're putting on our workers. But I guarantee you, out of your whole entire workforce, there will be people that will be feeling that pressure.
And I suppose then that becomes a bit of an ecosystem where the data is reinforcing this distorted view of the workplace until potentially one day you get a huge wake-up call, which maybe shows you otherwise.
Yeah, and it's happened. Like when we think about the BP disaster, that is what happened. Like they were 6 or 7 hours away from celebrating something like 7 years of injury-free on a rig. Like you have to be kidding me, right? Like how old was that rig? Are we actually saying for that amount of time there was no incident or injuries on it? Like, of course there was. It's the same with any site that's, got a billboard out the front that says they've had, 365 days. I guarantee you, if you put your ear to the ground, there will have been some sort of injury that was not reported. Some organisations I've worked for out in the sticks, luckily, but still out in the sticks, used to pay people lump sums of money so that it stayed off the record. Like we knew you were needing surgery, we knew you were needing something. So instead of going down workers' compensation, we physically gave you money as if it was hush money to not report those things. So this is happening not in 1965, not in, 2000. This is happening right now in organisations across Australia because of those numbers. And we keep alluding and, giving ourselves this false delusion that everything's okay based on those numbers, and it's not.
Yeah. And I take it, Georgina, as well, that the passion that you have for the subject and writing the book comes out of these experiences, which I know you have a very personal relationship to these things.
Yeah, I mean, I've had to talk to safety advisors who are having to go back to workers and say, I need you to go to a different doctor because we can't have that injury on there. And when you see people in tears, and myself ugly crying in the workplace because you're trying to have a conversation where the illusion is we're safety first. In actual fact, we need to be people first. And how do we think that worker is feeling when we're having a discussion on, actually, I know the doctor told you were a lost time injury, but we really can't have that. We need you to go and change that back to, like a medically treated or something a little bit lower, because we can't have it on our record. It will impact our incentives or whatever, it's going to impact on. Those are the hard truths that, yes, shape my passion around this topic.
And I suppose shape workers' feeling towards the safety culture at a business as well. When you start to see those things, how serious are you about?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and if that's what they're basing off their decisions, no wonder they're treating your safety team like rubbish when you go out to walk on the floor, right? Usually there's a lot more than just your number as what's driving someone's behavior towards that, of course. But definitely if your focus is on, those injury rates being there and making sure they're of a certain level, in some shape, way or form, you as a leader, when you go out onto the floor, you are demonstrating that in the things you're asking, like what you're looking at, the questions that you're, asking people while you're interacting with them. And that shapes everything. So yeah, those organizations with those metrics and numbers, your culture might look great on the surface, but I dare you to take it a few levels deeper and really put your ear to the ground and see what the culture is like underneath all of that.
Yeah. So you're saying put your ear to the ground. I guess that's also getting this idea of, how much you can look at just lagging indicators and where are you going to start looking for more nuance and context
Yeah,
around what data might be showing you.
yeah, most definitely. And there's a shift in the market around not just quantitative measures, but more qualitative, and really telling stories and understanding what can we learn from our people, that are out there at the moment. What can we learn about the front line and the challenges that they're facing? And those things are not things like I'm going to count how many conversations I've had. How many conversations doesn't tell you about the unmitigated risks that you have within your organization. And that kind of loops back into that very first point we said, where when you go ear to the ground and you start operational learning, then you learn things that might make you feel a little bit uncomfortable about. And it's that question of, are you ready and do you want to hear about those things that might make you feel uncomfortable? Because you can't start to change that narrative away from a focus on metrics if you don't want to feel uncomfortable, if you're not okay with that little bit of disruption to your current thought process.
Yeah. There's, I guess you're getting into the psychology of change, which it can be,
Yes,
as human beings, it's causes friction.
most definitely.
It's difficult to lean into that, particularly if there can be things that you don't want to hear. What have you found for organizations from that aspect that you found helpful to help them even want to explore and maybe embrace the idea that maybe there's better ways to do this?
Yeah, so a lot of organisations today, and there's a number that I'm currently working with, are leaning towards operational learning. So they still definitely report on lost time injury frequency rates and total recordable injury frequency rates. But as part of their insights that they're gaining from their workplace, they move away from safe act observations, as in you're looking at the workers going, oh, yep, you've done something good, you've done something naughty, and I'll go and put it into my safety management system and record that. A lot of organizations are using different tools like curious questions, the 4Ds, etc., to be able to learn about those things that we just talked about. What's challenging, what might not make sense. Sydney has a great question around what's the stupidest thing that we make you comply with at your organization. So when you learn about those things that are making it hard for your frontline workers to do their tasks, you can actually put that into your safety management system and gain some really great insights. And there's lots of tech, right? Like that, even you yourself in your organization, Donesafe, have it, that is able to analyze that data and provide those themes and things back to the organization to help them learn appropriately from what they're reading. So lots of organizations are not dropping those injury frequency rates immediately or, throwing them out with the bathwater, but they're making small shifts towards learning from their frontline and gaining those insights to then change up their interventions that they're putting out amongst the workforce. So rather than a blanket glove policy across the organisation, we went to the ground, we did a learning team perhaps on what are the things that we think are causing injuries in a particular area, and asked the workers, what do you think are causing hand injuries? And then we used that data to shape an intervention or a program, whatever you want to call it, in that particular work area. So it's a different way of going about things and changing the conversation. Another cool trick I'll share with you most recently was there's an organisation that I worked with that used a one-pager after an incident had occurred to share with the rest of the operational leaders in the organisation what had happened. And previously on this one pager that had, like incident details, it said findings in a particular box. And we know from an incident investigation and standpoint that in 24 hours, you're not going to have findings. It's going to take a while for you to actually learn and understand what happened. So rather than having findings that pressured their safety team into, what happened, how did it happen, etc., I literally changed the word findings to the word context. And in that box, instead of what did you find out, we put how did it make sense for the workers to do what they did? And we didn't tell anyone that we'd made that change to that one-page document, and we just sent it out. But interestingly, the conversations that started occurring from people reading the context about how it made sense. It was raining. There was no vision. Like they were coming around a corner and the light was in their face. Those kinds of things, those conditions being listed, helped to change the conversation to be much more about what happened and how it happened, as opposed to why the worker did what they did. And those are the conversations that from ground level up influence the top level decision makers around, we're still reporting on injuries, but what does that tell us? As opposed to, here's how it made sense for our workers to do what we did. And we didn't know about some of those things that, shaped those decisions. So that's where we need to focus our attention.
Yeah. And I think as well, you talk to a lot of health and safety leaders, and some struggle with engaging the executive, recruiting support, having a seat at the table. And certainly to do that, you need a good handle on your numbers. But I think sometimes there can be a fear to be an effective storyteller.
Yeah.
And, the power of having really compelling qualitative research, which tells a story and gives the why and the who, and the context can be transformational for boards, because it helps them to situate what does this data actually look like in the real world, in the field.
Yeah, and I think we forget that every number on those reports that you're talking to, that we place so much focus on, is actually a person. And at the end of the day as well, I guess there are 2 points here around this. The first one is that, it is a person, and who happens every day. You're never going to prevent everything bad from happening, which is why controversially zero harm, isn't a thing. But so you're never going to prevent everything bad from happening. And in your organization, if you're a trucking company, you're going to have vehicle on vehicle events. If you're a manufacturing company, you're going to have manual handling events. They're things that will happen. Those things will happen regardless of how many initiatives you put in place, how many programs you roll out, how many qualifications, degrees your supervisors or your safety professionals have. You cannot prevent everything bad from happening. But what you can do, though, when you do take on that learning perspective, is start to report on the things that surprised you, or those unmitigated risks, through storytelling. So when you report up to whoever it is in your board or your most senior executive level team, yes, you'll have 5 manual handling injuries, but you should have an extra box that talks to the one that surprised you, the risks that you didn't know about. Every organization will have an amount of events that are going to happen regardless of anything that you put in place. But if you learn about an unmitigated risk that you didn't know existed prior to that event happening, that's the story that should be told. And the other little tip I thought about whilst I was chatting as well there is, the other thing to do is we place a lot of focus on colours, as in green means it's good and red means it's crappy. So therefore, when someone is reading it from a human performance standpoint, our eyes tend to get attracted to the red and the green. A cool experiment I've done is removing all the colours altogether and changing the conversation so it just looks like numbers on a page, and then highlighting the story that you want to bring to someone's attention. And just doing a little simple exercise like that can help change that conversation at the executive leadership level.
Sure. Anything can be a frame, right? And prime people for how they're you're influencing how they should look at and give context to certain things, and it's predictable that they can. A great question from Jenny here. I'll put to you, sure. Georgina, on the point of putting your ear to the ground to engage in operational learning. What pointers do you give leaders who want to do this, but in the past they've had a history of recording unsafe behaviours, blaming people, and ridiculing others?
Yeah, so I recently worked with an organisation that were super excited about rolling out a 4Ds program, for example. However, just kind of thought they could go from yesterday we talked unsafe acts and today we're rolling out, 4Ds, asking curious questions, etc. There has to be some preparation time in between. You can't just go from today I thought you were rubbish and today I love you and think you're fantastic. You do have to prime, you do have to prepare your leaders. And also because when you start asking those curious questions, you're going to learn things that you may not be literally, mentally, physically prepared for. And that takes a little bit of work. So rather than, again, trying to stop and change immediately, I would highly recommend there being a little bit of preparation, like running a webinar, a session with the operational leaders, so they can really start to reframe before you just dump them in. And the thing is that you want to set your workers up for success. Your leaders, whoever's going to be asking those curious questions, you want them to feel like they have the right toolkit to be able to go out into the workforce and be successful. Because if all you've done is unsafe and safe act questioning, it's going to sound like that even if you ask curious questions. You need a little bit of preparation to change that mindset to get them into that right space. It's not going to be perfect, but definitely preparing the workers for that is something that you should do. And it's very easy to do. And I'm happy to share those tips on those things if Jenny wants to reach out, of course.
Sure. And if anyone else wants to ask a question in the chat as well, just hit the Q&A button. We're happy to take those as well.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I mean, that's an important part of field work as well, right? With dealing with people that you're trying to get insights from, is that, you know, we feel like we're entitled to know all this stuff. But if you've been in an environment where dialogue's not been easy, maybe there's been surveying in the past where nothing's come of it and there's some sort of fatigue around it.
Yeah,
there must be a thawing process to actually reestablish the rapport with workers so that they want to engage at this level.
Tell you. Yeah, and sometimes that does, what I've seen successful is sometimes it does help if you do have a third party, for example, or if they could tune into something else, like saying that, as opposed to the safety team. It's like, you guys sold me, you know, the moldy bread yesterday, and then today you want to sell me like a nice bit of bread, but nothing's changed, right? You're the same person you were yesterday. So sometimes it's really hard for leaders to swallow that, oh, we're changing, and oh, here's this new, you know, view of looking at things, and we're going to do that. But if you have someone else who's walked the walk, talked the talk, sometimes that can help influence those leaders to really understand and, you know, give them some insights around the challenges you might face. And trust me, there are a lot of challenges, especially if you are going into it thinking, here's a new tool, I'm just going to give that to my leaders and they'll be successful in gaining that information. That's not how that works. They do need, like you said, that time to thaw and to reframe and to practice as well. And then to also be mentally prepared for if someone discloses they've been bullied or sexually abused or whatever that looks like, they've had a fight with their wife 3 days ago and that's why their mind's not on the job. What are you going to do with that information? How is that going to be captured? What do you do with it? How do you report it? You know, there's all of those things that you need to be prepared for. So it's not as easy as just, you know, we did this yesterday and today we want to change the conversation. There has to be a little bit of prep time in between.
Yeah. And I guess as well, the things that you learn and the questions that you ask over time should get better, right? They start to evolve and become deeper as your frame of reference, the lens that you're looking at changes.
Yeah, that's right. 100%. And what you'll start to see as well is the language will start to change. So even if you're asking curious questions, I've seen insights come back that say no challenging behaviors identified. And it's like, we didn't ask you to identify any challenging behaviors, but because that's been the frame that you've gone out with for the last 20 years as a safety person, that's all that you've kind of got. So as time progresses and you keep practicing, you realize you're not asking word for word what Georgina had on a bit of paper. You're using your own lingo, you're building that rapport, you know, like you're going to use those questions as part of your everyday kind of remit. And then it becomes more natural and people are more willing to tell you information as opposed to, you know, we did not find anything requiring improvement in this area. It's like, I didn't ask you to go out looking for improvements in this area. But it's tough when you've been doing something for a particular way for a long period of time.
I'm curious then, with your consulting and your experiencing this rollout in different settings and organizations, for those that are making this transformation and maybe experiencing some turbulence at the start, what might be some of the things that are happening that might be holding back this getting traction at the start that you would identify early and say, these are critical things that you need to focus on if you want to create this change in the business?
Well, it's usually to do with the organizational culture where it currently sits. And it usually is that, you know, someone's seen something or heard something on LinkedIn or whatever and wants to make that change quite quickly. And so we've decided we're going to make the change and, you know, go and roll it out without kind of thinking about it in a staggered approach and without reinvigorating and creating the energy that kind of program kind of needs to start off with. If all your attitudes yesterday were around unsafe behaviors, then that flatness or that lack of passion or that lack of enthusiasm is going to be reflected through the curious questions that you ask. And so those insights that you get will not be insightful. They will not have the information that you need. So that a lot of the challenges that kind of come up initially are because of that doing that one process for such a period of time in a particular way, and then thinking that that automatically applies to how I go about this new process as well. So without any mindset change, without any of that preparatory kind of stuff happening in the background, whether it be with your leaders, your frontline, there's lots of fun and engaging things you can do to help people shift their mindset. It doesn't have to be boring, but often we think, yeah, cool, we'll just, do a toolbox talk and we'll roll out, whatever it is, and then it flops, and then you wonder why it flops. I've run some learning teams with some organizations that have gone down the path of organizational change to understand why did it flop? Like, why did it not make sense? Or what were the questions, and really kind of gauge and understand what was happening for those leaders as they were out, and how did they feel about asking the questions? What could have been done differently? And that's helped shape like stage 2 of those initiatives being rolled out as well. So that's something else organizations can do to learn from a failure or almost failure as well.
Yep. A question here from Paul. Leaders are represented on a bell curve, just like workers. Is there value in using innovative and early adopting leaders as a model for other leaders to following when you're looking to transform leadership?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's one element, though. I don't think you should put all your bang for buck in. Jenny's our prime example of how you should demonstrate excellent leadership, because not everyone identifies with leading by example. No matter what leadership course you have, yes, leading by example is one of those things. But some people want education and training. Some people want to be able to physically have someone coaching and buddying up with them, someone to shadow them when they go out in the workplace. And I think we forget that we're picking people off the tools and the equipment, and we're failing to give them some soft skills that we assume everybody has as well. And so I think there's an element of definitely using, your early adopters as, hey, everyone should be like, so-and-so. But I don't think that you should place all your eggs in the one basket and think that because you've got 3 early adopters, that means that every other leader in your organization is going to jump on board with following those. I think it needs to be a multi-pronged approach that will attack it from all sides and give them the illusion or the reality that, hey, our company means business. It's not just based off one person. We're doing this across all departments in all functions, and all of our leadership team are on board with the change.
Yeah. And also, I guess, taking an iterative approach as well. These things grow and improve over time.
Most definitely.
Your early iterations are to understand the nature of the people you're working with in the workplace, and how it's going to play out here, and what the blockers might be unique to your business.
Yeah, that's right. And every organization is different, right? You can't assume that, you're rolling out, even with software, right, that just because you rolled it out here, it's going to be exactly the same there. There's all these dynamic, bits of complexity that are at play in various organizations. And you really need to meet companies where they're at first. Regardless of what method of safety they actually do, you need to meet them where they're at and then draft a plan that will take them on that journey, not tell them to get off the bus and then bring in a new Ferrari that you think is going to solve their problems with.
Yeah, I mean, it's the most common thing, with software as well. Ask people, what's the problem you're trying to solve? And very often that'll look like the thing that we're already doing in a similar fashion that hasn't really been interrogated. I saw a news story before. I don't have all the facts perfectly in my head, but essentially I think it was a nursing student that asked, why do we change the drips in hands every 3 days for adults, but we don't for kids? And they said, yeah, well, let's have a look. And they did testing and research and found there was actually no reason to make that change. It causes discomfort to people. It increases costs. And simply just no one had asked the question. And it was someone who was doing their training just said, hey, why though? Why are we doing that thing? It's such a simple question that's now changed international practice in this area.
Yeah.
So
how amazing is that?
Yeah. So like what's the quality of the question? But also the question might be being asked from frontline. It may not even be asked by leaders. So being able to have, I guess, the listening mechanisms to make those insights visible and bring them to the surface so that you can profit from as a business.
Yeah, I mean, well, you could save heaps of money by asking your workers, how could we, make this job easier for you? If we could redesign this task or job or activity, how would you redesign it? And next minute, they're giving you the answer to a problem that your organization's been trying to solve at leadership level for quite some time. So, yeah, we should definitely listen to the frontline.
So, Georgina, let's just say we've got someone on the call today that comes from an organization that has this approach to safety metrics, but has motivation to make change. Not sure where to start, how to get traction. What are the first critical steps look like if you want to get momentum behind a change like this?
Sure. So I would probably say first and foremost is to kind of gain some buy-in from your most senior level leaders around that. So once you've researched what is it that you'd like to do, what type of change, what are we talking about in essence? Like, is it literally just asking some different questions, things that may not necessarily need, the world to be changed? You can go down the line of micro experimenting and doing little experiments like I did with changing colors and doing that. But if you want to create a type of change that shifts a culture, then you need to take time to gain that buy-in at the very highest level possible first. And you need to try multiple avenues of doing that. And it has to be across all functions. This can't be seen as a safety department initiative or program. The companies that are doing this successfully do it successfully because it's an operational performance thing. It's not a change that safety is rolling out. It's not a program that safety just goes and does. It has to be a change that's across all business units and all functions. And when you do something like operational learning, asking curious questions, it's not a safety thing anyway. So each business unit can gain value out of making those changes, being curious about why did this particular error occur in quality, or why did our environmental system, fail in that particular area, or why did we not meet our procurement deadlines, whatever that is. If you can put the curiosity hat on, you will find you're going to find those savings in time, budget, etc. So if you can communicate that and get that buy-in first and foremost across the senior most executive or highest level across your organization, that's a better way of setting yourself up for success. And I know this because not only working with multiple organizations currently in different various parts of their journey on organizational change. But last year in October, November, I got to spend some time interviewing about 25 senior executive leaders across Europe who are doing curious questions, operational learning, safety, whatever you want to label you want to put on it, but basically doing safety differently, the verb, not the noun for it. And the one thing that seemed to be similar across all of these, and we're talking from CEO down to change agents at safety manager level, et cetera, was not getting that buy-in created so much hurt, so much mental stress, so much challenges on the front when they were trying to implement the change, that it really affected the success of that change being there in the first place. And we should all know, right? Like when you have an advocate for whatever you believe in, a little bit of that stress and a little bit of that workload, that load on your shoulders is alleviated. So definitely starting with that first buy-in, but then thinking about your strategy as well would be the next step after you've gained buy-in across all business units and functions, is developing a strategy of where do we want to go and what does that look like. And when you do that, it's not senior level leadership that develop that strategy. It's the parties that will actually play a part in it, including your frontline workers, come together, have some sort of workshop, learning team, focus group, whatever you want to call it, and really work out what is it we want to achieve and what are those key milestones along the way that we need to achieve to do that. And once you have that, then you can set out, okay, well, we need to talk to Georgina, or we need to talk to Ben, or we need to go and research this, or, do whatever that looks like. But unless you've got buy-in and you have some idea of where you want to go on your journey, you can't roll out a program. It's going to fail. You need to have that first. That buy-in and that strategy is probably the two most important things in organizational change. And they were the two key elements that I have learned so far from interviewing people around organizational change.
The question from Daniel Stone on this: is there a consistent framework for cultural change, or is it entirely dependent on the context of the organization? And is there any guidance or info you can help with this?
That's what I'm studying, Daniel. So my PhD is on organizational change, particularly around modern safety practices, obviously. So the aim is in now 2.5 years, because I'm almost at the early candidature milestone mark, that in 2 years from now, 2.5, I'll be able to give back to all of us a method or framework that shows, out of all of these organizations, here's what actually works and here's what doesn't. But my aim is along the way, like I just did with here are the 2 things that kind of stuck out from those 25 or so interviews with global leaders, that I share that information as I'm learning. And I thought my PhD topic around driving sustainable organizational change after a change agent leaves the organization was a worthy topic, because I know that probably every single one of you on the call are change agents driving changes, and we want our initiatives to stick, and we want it to be successful regardless of whether we're in the organization or not. So there isn't a framework you can just go and buy right now and help solve a problem. But I think in 2.5 years I'll have some answers around what works and what doesn't work, and I think that so will all of you on the call, with sharing and learning from each other as well.
Yeah. And I guess even having a sense as well of knowing when it's working and not working.
Yeah,
Particularly with qualitative processes, right? It's another type of information that's coming in, having a sense of how calibrated you are to what's coming, and if it's showing you what you need to. Yeah. It's another major thing that.
If nobody's reporting anything, then you don't have to spend thousands of dollars to understand where your culture's at, right? And I put a post up the other day because I had a manager talking about our workers not caring about their health and safety, and right. when they're not reporting on things, right, what does that mean? If you're not getting reports, if you're not getting insights, if when you go out to do a leadership walk, people are like, there's nothing here, that's an indicator of culture. You don't need a survey, you don't need a diagnostic tool to understand whether an initiative is working, right? And if you've rolled out a glove program and yet you're still having hand injuries, it's pretty obvious that you've not done enough operational learning. If you're having events that are continuously based off corrective actions that should have been implemented, then that's an indicator that you're not learning from your events, right? You don't need to be a rocket scientist to tie those kinds of things together.
Yeah, very good. If there's any more questions, drop them in the chat. Otherwise, Georgina, any final thoughts to wrap up this topic today?
Just that I understand it's really hard to have to come to terms with changing the narrative around those metrics, because they have been around for quite some time. And what I would ask all of you to do is not necessarily think that I'm requesting everyone throw them out, but more change the narrative and try to remember that for every injury that you argue about, for every number that you try to drop, you're actually talking about someone's life. And we shouldn't be saying that safety is our first priority or safety is first. It should actually be our people come first. We think they are the solutions. We don't think they're the problems. We don't blame them when an event occurs. And when an injury happens, we treat them with the respect and decency that they deserve. And that includes all parts of the process, whether they are on our metrics or not. But they're treated as if they're a valued member of our organisation that we trust, because we did yesterday. Only today they've had an injury and now we think of them slightly different. They are still our workers, and they are the ones that keep our businesses being successful. So I would urge everyone to just remember it's people first, not safety first. And those numbers, they're your people, and they drive your success. So that would be my lasting thoughts.
I've got one last question that will sneak in from our few peers.
So okay, well, that wasn't my last thought then. Let's go to my next last thought.
So if we're seeking low-hanging fruit as a platform for sustainable change, what 3 new measures would you recommend?
Okay, if you're going for low-hanging fruit, depends on what you're doing. If you're doing learning teams, for example, so some companies I've seen, they're doing learning teams. So the low-hanging fruit you could do with learning teams is the outcomes that are coming from a learning teams and whether they're driving actions. So corrective actions, etc. The feedback that are given from your interactions. So rather than safe act observations, after a leader has done a walk in the field, go and chat to people that they've interacted with and ask them how they're feeling. So the criteria around feedback, is it positive? Is it negative? Did they feel like the leader actually cared about what they were saying, is going to do something? And then something else you could potentially look at might be feedback. So asking your workers, have you reported something? Did someone follow up on it? And how soon did they follow up on it, for example? 3 bits of low-hanging fruit that you don't need $1 million. You could literally go and ask about today. You could knock it into a safety reporting system and start gaining those insights. But that will also help you shift just ever so slightly that narrative towards moving away from these traditional metrics that we placed all of our focus on.
Great.
And you've recorded the conversation, right? Because just in case I forget what I said, everyone can perhaps listen to a recording at some point, maybe.
Very good.
Awesome.
Okay. So I want to thank you, Georgina, for your time today. It's a very interesting, lively discussion on very worthy topic. If you haven't already got your copy of the book, Random Noise, just by being on the call today, you will be drawing 15 lucky winners of the book soon. But otherwise, grab your copy. It's a really great book. I've gifted a few of them now. Nice. Lots of very compelling information on there. And also, if you'd like to work with Georgina, you can get her probably most easily on LinkedIn. Is that right, Georgina, to book a meeting?
Yep, that's completely fine. At the top of my LinkedIn profile, there is a button that says book an appointment, and it just drops straight into my calendar. So no need to ask, no need to reach out, just literally go and press the button. I am completely fine with that.
And if you want to talk about your data and how to better collect and connect those dots, feel free to reach out to us anytime as well. We'd love to have conversations about what your goals are and where you're trying to go and how data and technology can help to scale and improve that. So reach out to us if you'd like to have a chat. Otherwise, I'd like to thank Georgina again, and we'll be talking to Dr. Tristan Casey on our next webinar coming up soon. So keep an eye on LinkedIn for those dates, and otherwise we'll talk to you soon. And thank you for coming today.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben.